Hi, my name's Alex Browsell. I'm the editor on M&M Global, and welcome to the Festival of Media Global 2017 here at the Rome Cavalieri Hotel. M&M Global has partnered with Integral Ad Sciences for a look at one of the topics that's really dominated the media and marketing industry this year, and that is brand safety. I'm sure everyone watching this will have seen some of the headlines that have really taken over and spawned out into the international and national press, looking at brand safety and issues of brand content appearing next to extremist content, and it's become a huge issue for our industry. Well, it has been a huge issue for a long time, and I'm gathered, thankfully, a panel of brand experts to help me discuss where we are as an industry and where we might be able to go next. If you guys are all able to introduce yourselves and let us know who you are.
Hello, my name's Christine. I'm running the Audi Global Media.
Thanks, Christine. My name's Nick Morley. I'm the European Managing Director of Integral Ad Science.
Hi, I'm Elisa, the Country Manager for Italy.
I'm Nick Graham, Director of Media Marketing for Huawei Technologies.
I'm Steve Pollock, Head of Media Communications for Nestle UK and Ireland.
Hugo Pinto, Innovation Services Leader for EMEA.
Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for joining us to talk through this subject, which obviously has really been thrust into the limelight with, some of the exposures from, the Times and the British media, but also American media, and has really put companies like Google and Facebook, into a bit of a situation where they've been defending themselves lately. And brands, I'm sure, have been looking at where they are, what exposure they have to these kind of perils. And I'd love to just go around and get a kind of sense from you guys what you feel about the way that the topic has been portrayed this year, if you feel that it's a valid representation, and if you feel that it's only just, marketers are now only thinking about it because of recent media coverage, or do you think this is something you've been thinking about a long time?
Well, on our side, we've been thinking about it for quite some time, and it's not a new topic. If you think about the death of Lady Di back in the days and what happened back then, brand safety has always been a concern, and especially if you're a supposedly premium automotive manufacturer, you don't want to be seen in environments that could be perceived as harmful to the brand. We've been trying to pay as much attention as possible to not being seen in any context that has to do with crime, war, porn, anything related to that. And we've got a couple of categories that we try to be very careful on. Obviously in the digital space it's a bit more complex, and during recent events we stopped our campaigns in the UK. Actually, my local colleague did that. We cut some activities short in the US because we didn't want to be associated with that, and we think that the platforms that we advertise on need to take their part of the responsibility and need to implement better practices. Yeah. And we have to do the same thing on our side to ensure that things run more smoothly and that we're not being harmed.
Yeah, we'll come to you guys in a sec, but let's get all the brand perspectives. What do you got, Nick?
Yeah, I think that the topic's come to a head in recent weeks with video and inappropriate content, but the more long-standing thing has been around display advertising, the quality of display advertising in its digital capacity. So it's not a new issue by any stretch, but is it resolved? Not yet. And I think what I find interesting is that there seems to be a greater attempt to resolve the video side of this issue, whilst leaving a lot of loose ends regarding display. So I find that fascinating. So I find where we're getting the large corporations replying for video and being seen to be a lot more proactive, we're still finding a lot of silence around the display side of things. So that's that I find telling.
Yeah. Steve?
We're the same as Audi. I mean, I think anyone any clients to whom it came as a surprise probably haven't been doing their jobs properly. We've been since we started using programmatic buying. We've been really hot on brand safety, viewability, the whole thing. Work with Integral, work with Mode, whitelist, blacklist, the whole thing. So we weren't caught out because of maybe that was lucky, maybe it's because of all the precautions that we already had in place, but it certainly didn't come as a surprise to us. I think it's a bit overblown, to be honest, as well. Maybe with a media owner who had a little bit of an axe to grind, a little bit of an agenda of their own, but that's another story.
Hugo, what about you? And from I guess you're coming from a more artificial intelligence perspective. What's your take on the situation?
This question is actually quite close to my heart. I feel like it's a symptom of the phase we're going through as technology is starting to evolve faster than we can control it. And I think it's been happening for quite a long time, right? And our capability to place personalized advertisements across a multitude of websites, apps, etc., has multiplied tremendously. But I think now is the time in which the brands are starting to demand the call of, we want some auditability, we want some responsibility behind that exercise, right? And I also feel like technology has evolved enough to start being taken into consideration as a potential solution for this issue as well. And not only from an artificial intelligence perspective, I mean, there's a lot of different use cases I can think of that would help solve this problem. But it's almost like from a transparency exercise from the whole media industry itself. So I think it's a very big challenge, and it's a challenge from everyone, right? And I think these crises have just sort of brought back the conversation, and it comes at the same time that GDPR is coming into effect. And it's going to have a huge impact on how companies actually strategize and responsibility in how you leverage those bits of information to deliver customized experiences that actually favor the user are going to be far more in demand than they are now, which is probably more around volume.
Yeah. And Nick, Elisa, I guess you know this is a subject that you've specialised in for a long period of time. Have you noticed over the past 6 months there's been a change in the kind of conversations that you're having?
Yeah, for sure. I think back to your first question. This is a known problem. We've known that it's existed for quite some time. Certainly in digital marketing, it's probably something that everyone in the digital marketing department's been trying to fix for quite some time. All of a sudden, it's become a CEO level conversation, right? It's become sensationalized by the media, which in many ways has been unhelpful. But I suppose looking at it with the glass half full, perhaps the people in digital marketing, they perhaps weren't getting the necessary buy-in from people, maybe not getting the right budget allocations. Now it's become a genuine top table discussion. The focus is coming. Hopefully we can get to a fix faster. The reality is, and I think Christine touched on this point, truly fixing it lies on the responsibility with the advertisers, with publishers, with technology platforms in between, with agencies, and with the end platforms themselves, the YouTubes, the Googles and the Facebooks of this world. And I think as an individual consumer, take my IAS hat off or my industry hat off, as a consumer with children, you don't want to see this content there, and you certainly don't want to see the everyday brands that you buy and perhaps love appearing against this content. So, I think we all as individuals, irrespective of what we do in our day job, probably need to do our part to, minimize. I don't think we can completely remove this risk, but we can certainly do more to minimize that risk.
And from the perspective then of what has happened so far, Elisa, the industry's been sort of publicly flogged in terms of the consumer press for its approach to the subject so far. What accomplishments, what achievements have been made so far in terms of achieving brand safety? If we're going to put a positive viewpoint on things.
Yeah. So definitely, the display part and the programmatic part can be covered. I'm not saying in an easier way, but can be covered. For example, in programmatic, as long as the people that are managing it are activating it properly, like through the DSPs, activating the pre-bid segment for brand safety, viewability and fraud, that can be a sorted issue. There are still challenges, as Steve was saying, on the video and on the in-app part, so that is actually, should be an industry effort to overcome these challenges. There is still a lot to do in these two sectors. But, the good thing is that the technologies, there is evolution, the industry is working towards it, and is a known topic, as Nick was saying. Another good point is that the customization is good, so there are the opportunities now to customize your brand safety objective. So brand safety shouldn't be standard for every brand. Brand safety should give brands the opportunity to customize their own setting. Any brand have different products, and different products have different brand safety goal or different brand entities. So that is a good step.
I'd love to know from each of you, I guess, where do you think the responsibility lies for achieving brand safety? You know, is it something that brands need to sort of proactively look into themselves? Is it something that they should be depending on technology partners for? You know, who's kind of responsible for this?
So Alex, I think that's a good question. I'd err on the side of caution and say it exists. The onus exists with media owners, brands, as well as media owners, brands, and agencies. It's all three, right? From a media owner perspective, and I think this is the point where we're often a bit silent on. I think a lot of the content, there's policy out there, and it's an internet issue, it's a digital issue more than anything. There's policy out there about open web, which I think is fantastic and has it's moved the world on in leaps and bounds. However, certain content and certain channels maybe shouldn't be there. So the curation aspect, and I put it down to curation or channel curation, could be a lot stronger with the media owner, and that's something I feel quite strongly about. Also, as a parent, I think as I've grown up, maybe I didn't hold that view a few years ago, but as circumstances change, I realized that's something that maybe we should take a second look at, and it's a very, very complex issue. On the agency side, agencies are proactive, they're operational, they're enforcers, if you like, ensuring the settings are correct. The technology vendors themselves, helping produce capability for screening of inappropriate material, etc., ensuring quality at a very top level. So it exists across everyone, and then ultimately the brand needs to decide what is that threshold that it wants to operate within. So it's across the spectrum, but what I don't want to lose sight of is the silent point. We're often, because of the sensitivity of it, it's the media owner. There's a huge part media owners should play. I think they have a role to play in this, and it's around policy.
If I can add to that, I think it's a lot about clarifying expectations. I know from my past that sometimes clients are more in a receptive position, and they're surprised if something appears in non-safe environments, and then they start turning around and blaming the media agency or the media owner. I think there's a lot of responsibility on the client side to be very clear to the agency where they want to be seen and where they don't want to be seen. If that step is missed, you can't really do anything much. Of course, there's responsibility on the media agency side, but they would act on behalf of the client, on behalf of the briefing that they received. The media owners, in turn, of course, they want to sell their inventory. It's not a surprise that they maybe don't take as much care if they're not explicitly being prompted to look out for things. And in that context, I think the initial steps now that Google is taking by stopping the long tail appearances that can't really be controlled are a good first step, but it's still an advertiser's responsibility and duty to actually make very clear to the industry what the expectations are.
I agree with that, and in a sense we've always done it. We have TV campaigns, we don't want to appear in sex and violence. We've always said that. I think the difference now is what's out there is a lot more extreme than what you'd get on traditional media.
And the range.
And the range of it. I think it's all of our responsibilities. I wish that horrible stuff wasn't out there. There'd still be a lot of, let's say, acceptable in inverted commas that we might not like, but another client might be happy with. Someone just said it, we've probably all got slightly different definitions of brand safety, but then there's that big chunk that we'd all agree on. We don't want to appear next to beheading videos and that kind of thing. So it's I think it's definitely clients have to play a part.
Yeah.
I think.
I kind of that point as well, Nick. But then also, a lot of blame has been thrust in generally in the direction of programmatic media. As if programmatic is somehow the sort of the enemy in this situation. That by using algorithms, you're taking your eye off the ball and you're no longer thinking about, the kind of details or maybe it's too granular almost. Do you think that's a fair accusation?
Well, I think that is certainly happening. With the rise of programmatic, the fact that you can just have there is so much reach that you can create and you can bid on these things in real time. There is just a new level of complexity that's been introduced that means that it's much easier for these things to sneak under the wire. And to Steve's point around TV, that it was harder for those things to happen. The content didn't exist, and if it did, you had to really go looking for it. Whereas now, it exists in a public forum in Facebook or Google or YouTube, wherever, and that content can be created and uploaded in a matter of seconds with the minimal amount of skill. And so that means when a brand is operating in a programmatic environment, there is, that risk is now present. There are measures that you can take to minimize those risks, but the very fact that that content now is there means that it's very hard to completely remove that risk unless the content disappeared. And that probably isn't going to happen, as soon as perhaps we would like. So there are tools, there are methods of doing it. Maybe the industry probably needs a bit more education, a bit more awareness. We need to know that those things exist. Let's utilize them to their fullest extent. And only once you use something to the fullest extent, you then start to think about, well, what's the next thing we could tackle? Whereas if you don't get to the edge, if you don't try and, push that ceiling on, you're just not pushing yourself hard enough as an industry. That's why I think there's perhaps a collective sort of individual need that we all need to take on board within our individual companies, and by pushing those ceilings together, hopefully we get to a more complete solution faster.
I think there's a danger that programmatic can be carrying the can actually for poor buying practices. I think if you approach it the right way and you put brand safety filters, maybe if you buy less through open exchanges and more from private marketplaces, there's lots of things you can do to still buy programmatically and make yourself a lot safer. If you just spray it out there and say, buy me a programmatic campaign, you're going to end up with a load of rubbish and a lot of brand unsafe inventory. But I think that there's lots of ways that good agencies and clients working with good agencies can minimize the risk. So it's not programmatic per se, I think it's the way you use programmatic.
And I guess what's happened in the short term, because it's become such a sensational issue and people have been forced to act very, very quickly, you then need to take some very draconian near-term steps, blacklisting and really pulling things down that then you've still got a need to get reach and frequency, and that becomes very difficult to do. So, it's almost things have got out of hand, you then pull it back in, hopefully the market can find its real kind of equilibrium. Sooner we get to that, the better, because there's a lot of noise and people are getting asked a lot of difficult questions from at a board level at the moment.
So I almost wonder I almost wonder if there's a need for actually all of the intervenients to come together and agree to standards, because I think one of the problems is there are no standards, right? There are no standards on what is a clear briefing for a programmatic campaign, what is an engagement strategy, and you end up having a lot of shotgun effect like you were talking about, right? Let's just spray that area and we'll get a few of them, right? And I think that is changing in two ways. One of them, and AI is one of the technologies that brings capabilities to that, which is being able to really know who your customer is and really know when you need to engage with them. Because currently I still see programmatic as pretty much as segmenting a type of customer instead of understanding that different segments might be on target in different contexts and in different points of time, right? So I think on one end, technology is evolving to get you closer to that real-time targeting, which will reduce the risk of actually contacting someone in the wrong moment and suddenly you're off brand, right? The second thing is in terms of starting to digitize the process that we have to audit those things. Because we've digitized the full process of creating and producing and deploying programmatic campaigns. We have not digitized the auditing capabilities. We have not digitized legislation, right? So there's a bit of catch-up that needs to be done here. And let me just give you an example. There are systems today that put together, I don't know if it actually someone's already doing this or not, that could, when an impression is placed, or even before it is placed, to go and do a print screen of what that ad campaign would look on that site, and actually see before it's served if it's breaking any of the brand guidelines, if it's associated with any content it shouldn't, even if it's visible or not, right? So if you had this as a standard implemented at scale in the industry, I mean, this would raise the bar for everyone, because suddenly you no longer get away with volume markets by toning down on the KPIs or on the segmentation principles, right? So I think it's a coming together of starting to use the technology to bring the auditing and the standards up to speed with the capability that we have today, right? Because any startup can come in and build a trading algorithm that starts distributing hundreds of millions.
Well, hopefully we get effective self-regulation. Otherwise, we get rather draconian external regulation.
Well,
I guess
that's it. You'd rather shoot yourself.
There's been a
in
risk
the
of
foot.
that recently.
Christina, yeah.
One addition. I think, well, the one positive side I'm taking from all these scandals and from the publications and articles that have been out there over the past weeks and months, I think it's that sometimes the problem needs to occur for everybody to start thinking about it and take action, because I think we would have been advertising away happily for a long time with very low levels of awareness if this hadn't happened. So I think that's the one positive thing coming out of it, that actually everybody, and well, at least everybody I'm talking to, on the advertiser side, on the agency side, and also on the vendor side, starts thinking about that a lot more. And technology side obviously as well. And I think that's a good thing, because everybody seems to feel that the direction that we need to move into is the same direction. And that doesn't happen that often.
There's almost, if I try to gaze into some sort of crystal ball and look a few years down the line, there's also kind of some deeper philosophical challenges where, mobile inventory is on the rise. The way in which we consume the internet or digital is evolving and has been evolving for a decade now with smartphones. So I think I'll focus on IAB unit ads, on bog standard advertising, if you like, display advertising, in its simplest form. There's plenty of interesting counterexamples today, but in its simplest form, I think we're going to see a decline of its importance going forward. I've already spoken quite heavily about the number of ad slots on publisher sites, this sort of thing. We tend to oversaturate publisher sites with ad slots. Equally, there was the issue I raised earlier around policy around what sort of content, and should we have advertising ad slots against certain content. So there's a due diligence aspect both on the side of the publishers. In terms of content, but also equally in terms of the number of ad slots, the monetization thereof, and there's been a line of thinking running for at least a decade now around the economics of the internet advertising. Like what is that critical point where we can actually just reduce the number of ad slots and up CPMs. If we're getting value from that, if we can prove its effectiveness, because it hinges on effectiveness and effectiveness studies. How can we make the experience for users better? Now, the driving force around that, and I think what will bring this discussion back into play is mobile. It's going to bring it back in because the format is so different to desktop. I don't like consuming standard IAB formats, the leaderboard, the skyscraper, the old ones, the MPU. I don't like consuming that on a smartphone. So I think we're reaching a point where it's right to look at that again and look at the role in which the way in which pages are divided up and how inventory is created. I think the time's right for that.
Elisa, if I could come to you next to, good folk around us having cups of tea and coffee and meetings. I mean, what should their priorities be from tomorrow onwards, to kind of tackle this challenge, to deal with brand safety, if it's possible to deal with it?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, we should think about at 360 degrees the media quality. So, brand safety, viewability, and fraud. We shouldn't forget about fraud. Especially when we talk about viewability, for example, we should make sure that the fraudulent percentage, or what is seen as fraudulent, is taken off from the viewability percentage. Is my ad placed in a safe environment? Is my ad placed in a cluttered environment, as we say? Is my ad, colliding with different other ads on my same campaign within the same page. So media quality at 360 degrees should come.
So it's not
brand
something
safety.
that you can tackle in isolation. Then it's a broader media quality question.
Sorry.
So apologies.
Yeah,
It's a broader media quality question, and it's not something that you tackle in isolation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 360 degrees. So brand safety connected with viewability and fraud would be the first step. Second step, collision of clutter, geo, and device ID, language. Another important thing with brand safety is to make sure that vendors are covering different languages, especially for global brands, because it's so easy just talking about keyword lists and using everywhere in different countries. But if you don't have technology that is able to translate it in different languages, it's difficult. It's still an issue.
Christine, I feel like you were going to come in then.
No, I
Apologies. Sorry, I misread that. Nick?
Yeah, and just to expand on this point, I think we can all agree, because I think what Elisa was talking about there is some of these things are quite basic hygiene levels, aren't they? And we can all agree that we need that hygiene level in place, and perhaps this topic of brand safety has become very sensationalized very quickly. It's become probably a bit of a distraction and a bit of a noise. Probably need to hopefully get it fixed, or at least almost fixed, so we can move on to I think the real matter at hand, which is I'm spending all this money on media or on ads, and what kind of action is that eliciting from consumers? And that's probably what you guys want to be thinking about, and yet we're bogged down in some of these these hygiene levels. So I think Lisa's absolutely right. We have to think about viewability, fraud, brand safety all together, get it fixed as one cohesive piece. Hopefully get back to the matter at hand, which is, if I spend all this money, what happens next with the consumer?
I totally agree. I really do agree. We're spending, all of us, we're spending more and more online, and we've kind of rushed into it as an industry, and we're just starting to take a little bit of a step back and say, well, out of all this money that we're spending, what's really working, what's giving us a return on investment, and what isn't? So I absolutely agree with that. The other big thing, I think, to answer your question, is education. I think the whole digital ecosystem is so complicated, and we're all experts and we understand it. The people with the money, our brand teams, they don't do it all day, every day. They're doing a lot of other things. And we've made it so complicated that it's really difficult, I think, to explain to our marketing and brand colleagues what we're doing with their money. And I think that could be the next big thing, I think, that comes down the pipe for the industry.
I think there was a fantastic quote the other day, just to put a label on that as an industry, we're still lost in the plumbing. And we haven't surfaced out of that to effectiveness and the big topics.
So I feel like I need to throw another spanner in the works, because
It's always a good thing.
for 2 points. So one of them, everyone's listening to the rise of voice, right? Voice commerce, voice engagement. And then there's AR and VR, which is like this. Again, it's a little bit of a blue elephant in the room, right? In a corner, everyone knows they're there, no one's talking about it yet. Both of these are going to have new challenges in terms of ensuring brand safety in that environment as well, right? So I wonder, how can we abstract the good practices and the principles to make it not future-proof, but future-enabled? Because if we solve mobile, we're just solving what is already sort of lagging against. And I mean, we're having this conversation now. In 2 years, probably we're going to be talking about something else. And you're going to be talking on how to make sure that refrigerators actually don't order food that is going to be against your allergy specifications, something like that. The second one is around consumer preference. So I think there's going to be a big mess that is going to occur when the same consumer can have different personas and different profiles demanding two separate and maybe even opposite things in the same environment, right? And so imagine me navigating a website with the lens of the parent, the family dad looking for stuff for my 2-year-old, etc. And then imagine me looking at it from the professional side, in which it's all about efficiency and taking the least time possible to airports and hotels. These are going to bring out two totally separate behaviors. The same consumer maybe even the same services, right? Because I fly business, but then I fly with my family as well. So I think we really need to sort of think about those best practices and basics of customer information and customer preference before we just think it's about the exposition of the media and the ad formats in different channels, right? So I think it needs to be end-to-end, a little bit like you were saying, Christine. It needs to be end-to-end from who is the person you're engaging with and what are they trying to achieve, and what are all of the things, the capabilities, and the intermediaries that are going to go from one end to the other.
Obviously, hopefully, in 12 months from now, we will have stopped worrying about brand safety. It will all be about refrigerators and what they're telling grocery retailers or whatever it may be. But but you know, I mean, I guess to keep it to today, and you know, I guess what we've learned over the last 6 months, and hopefully how the industry will progress over the next coming 12 months until we're maybe back in Rome again next year. I guess, what do you feel like the industry has learnt over this whole course of, you know, everything being dragged through the press? And maybe, are you confident? How confident are you that we will have this sorted to a certain extent 12, 24 months down the line?
Okay, so I think there's a reason for the terminology best practice. It's always based on what you can do at this point in time and on how far technology has developed until a certain point in time. I would hope that most of the things we're talking about right now would be resolved within the next 12 to 24 months. I don't think they will all be, because there's always little niches and bits and pieces that you weren't aware of, or that you just missed out on, and you will have to continually try and fix those. Wherever a gap is popping up, you have to start and rectify that as quickly as possible. I don't think we'll just be talking about refrigerators, for sure. And I just think there's a lot of things to do to continue developing things. I don't think there's a perfect solution that's going to be available after 24 months. And especially with everything developing so fast, there's going to be somebody coming up with something new where another in-safety, how do you say that in English, where another non-safe situation is being created, and if and when that comes up is the point in time to start tackling it. So we're not safe ever. Yeah. It's a bit paranoid, huh?
Yeah, definitely agree. I think there are known knowns that we know that just need to get fixed. So let's crack on and do that. You know, to Hugo's point, there are known unknowns. We haven't even got the time to get onto those. Let's identify them. And, you know, a lot of those solutions exist. And they can fix many of the problems. We're in such a fast-moving world that new things keep appearing. So there's always going to be an element of our role, which is a bit like that fairground game, whack-a-mole. You're trying to, you know, catch those new things. So there's always going to be an element of that. But if you haven't addressed some of the things that can be fixed by the technology or engage with the right people to get those done, you never have the time to engage in some of those more frustrating aspects. And, you know, to Hugo's point, we're in such a fast-moving world. And if we think about the amount of money that gets spent in this industry, we have to create the headspace to be thinking about what's next, because what's next sort of appears on our doorstep without us, you know, having the time to give it any thought, and then we're back here in the room talking about those challenges again. So, you know, I feel like we're, you know, perhaps in a way the press has done us a favour, you know, to Christine's point, maybe it has done us a favour and shone a light on these things that mainly can be fixed. Let's fix those. Let's get on to some of the more challenging conversations that need to be had and future-proof ourselves.
Yeah. Elisa, do you agree that I guess the controversies have done the industry a favour? In a way, it's brought it all to the limelight?
Yes, definitely. It's promoting also the dialogue between brands, agency, and publisher as well. So, you know, as everybody was saying, I'm just stating the same thing. Definitely there is still a lot to do. We are working on it. The industry is changing. It's like doping in sport. There is always a new way, you know, to try to find it. And we're working on it. We should maintain dialogue between the industry.
I guess in closing, from my part, I think it's that educational aspect on the advertiser side, on the agency side, also to a slightly lesser degree perhaps. But finally, of course, I'm going back to the media owner side. I think that onus on the media owner side to help organise things. But also one of the aspects we didn't touch on as much, this notional walled garden aspect. And I think there are some big structural barriers to resolving this. And ultimately to solve it properly would require a collective will across these large industry tech giants, which ultimately I think we are some way off from resolving that. I personally don't see an event horizon there in the next 12 months at least. But what has happened, and the good thing about the press recently is, there is a fire underneath this, and so there is a platform at the moment for this discussion, and I think we as an industry can do more to help expand that discussion, to include things like playing it back to display and context. Not just leaving it for video, for the resolution of video. We know that the dollars for video are pale in comparison to the dollars spent against display advertising. So we know that it's far more comfortable to talk about video and far less comfortable to talk about display. So these are things that we probably should spend more time addressing in the industry.
Yeah. Steve, you're an optimist. Do you think that we're heading in the right direction, that all that's sort of come out over the last 6 months is going to help push us forward, or do you think there are still some structural problems?
Yes, I'm an optimist, and yes, there are still structural problems. That's called sitting on the fence. No, it was probably a conversation that had to have been had. If it hadn't have happened now, it would have happened eventually. If it cleans up the inventory that's out there to a certain extent, that'd be brilliant. I think Hugo's point about moving forward is a great one. All we can do is every time something new comes along, learn from what we've done before. And that's the way we grow, and that's the way we make things better. So yeah, I'm optimistic that we'll get to a better place, and I just keep coming back to, whenever I talk to anyone about this, my 2 key points: return on investment and better education. We're just trying to simplify things. 3 points.
And Hugo, as our resident AI expert, I guess it's apt that you can conclude for us and look to the future. What's your take on what's happened and what you think will happen next?
So I feel like one thing that happened with AI, for instance, is I don't know if you know, but there are a few of them, but IBM and Microsoft and Google come together industry-wise in something called Partnership for AI, right? And that is about sharing some of the stuff that we're doing, sharing some of the mistakes that we're doing, so everyone knows and everyone doesn't just repeat the same thing over again, and build sort of these things that actually don't fit together, and it's just difficult for then brands and people within that ecosystem to be able to make a good choice, right? So I think there's space for that to happen. Maybe a partnership for brand safety, something like that. Secondly, I think technology is going to make us far more efficient in making sure that these things don't happen, right? So maybe just a little bit more of dedication into trying to preempt some of those things. Because the more you do that, the more transparency, the more trust, the more people will actually get involved and do the right thing, right? If you don't talk about it, it just sort of gets stuck to the corner of the room like that big blue elephant. So speaking about it is very good. You need to keep on speaking about it, because again, as many of you said, this doesn't happen once. We change and we're set for the future. It's going to keep happening. It's going to keep accelerating, and the size of the problem is just going to grow immensely. So talking about it and trying to find solutions as we go is probably the key thing that needs to happen.
Fantastic. Strong closing words. Thank you very much all. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great talking through this. I don't know, the next time there's a headline in one of the nationals or internationals, we can send this video and say we've got it sorted. Listen to these guys.
With a massive disclaimer.